most bizarre passages in Jewish history is undoubtedly the strange chapter of Khazaria. What exactly happened there? Were there Jews in Khazaria? What were their origins, and especially what happened to them? So one of the set of documents that sheds at least some light on Khazaria is the famous correspondence of King Joseph of Khazaria and Hasdai ibn Shaprut of Spain. There's, as we shall see, a lot of controversy about this particular correspondence, but I'd like to take just a minute to look at the correspondence itself and try to understand what that says about Khazaria and what we can glean from this unusual moment in Jewish history. Our story begins in Spain, specifically in Cordoba, which was a region of southern Spain that was associated with a tremendous period of Jewish creativity in an era known as the convivencia, the coexistence period, when Muslims in southern Spain allowed Jews a tremendous amount of possibility in the political, the literary, the cultural realm, and there was this amazing moment where Muslims, Christians, and Jews seemed to get together and to get along in an almost fabled golden era. There's a lot more to say about this, a lot of questions about the convivencia. Maybe we'll return to it. But at any rate, one of the early figures in the 10th century was an individual named Hasdai ibn Shaprut, who rose to prominence in Cordoba, and he actually became one of the most important ministers within that city, representing the region of Al-Andalus with all kinds of diplomatic correspondence. He was actually a medical doctor, and he treated patients in Christian regions as well as Muslim regions. Fascinating things. But at any rate, for our purposes, he was especially interested in learning about far-flung Jewish communities, and he wanted to use the power of his office to try and protect them and promote their interests and to promote Jewish unity. He really thought on a global level. And when he heard about the possibility of Jews living north of the Caspian Sea in the region of Khazaria, he was especially interested in learning more about them and trying to understand, what is the story with these Khazarian Jews? Now, we'll get to the actual story of the conversion of the Khazars shortly. It occurred about 200 years prior to this correspondence. But just to look at this map here, you can see that Khazaria is located north of the Caspian Sea in the region which would be today Ukraine, especially eastern Ukraine. And it is notably distinct from the Christian regions to the west and the Muslim regions to the south. That will become very significant in just a moment. At any rate, according to the history of the documents as we have them, Hasdai ibn Shaprut sent messengers out to Constantinople hoping to reach the kingdom of the Khazars. However, when they got there, they were blocked by the local Byzantine authorities, who would not allow these messengers from Spain to traverse the territory and make their way up there. And so they were forced to sit tight in Constantinople, which is, by the way, in contemporary terms, Istanbul. So they're sitting there, and they passed off their letters, and which apparently, according to the story of the correspondence, made their way to Khazaria, and a King Joseph read the letters from Hasdai ibn Shaprut in Spain and composed a response. This was an amazing thing. When it reached Hasdai ibn Shaprut in Spain, it was such a tremendous, it's like getting a letter from the moon. Oh my gosh, Jews in Khazaria? Who are they? How did they get there? And so on. So I have to burst a bubble right now and suggest that it is very likely that these letters themselves were forged, that they were not actually communicated to a King Joseph and then returned from Khazaria to Spain. That does not necessarily mean that there were not Khazarian Jews in Spain, but that this particular set of correspondence is probably a forgery. Let's look, though, at some of the evidence for Jews in Khazaria. Just one piece, which I find most fascinating. This is a document from the famous Cairo Geniza, and it dates roughly from this period, a little bit later. It's actually a rather remarkable document. It is a little tzettel. It's like or a kvittel. It's a document asking for financial charitable support for a traveler who comes apparently from the city of Kiev. You can see here, there's one, it's a little bit hard to read, but it looks like the letters Kuf, Yud, Yud, Vav, Ves, which would spell Kiev or Kiev, and it appears to be a document from Khazaria. This is reinforced by the fact that at the bottom, you actually have these Khazarian runes written, which translate to the phrase, I have read it. Now, there's a lot to say about what's going on. Who was it who signed these documents? What does it say about the nature of Jews in Khazaria and so on? And I would recommend you have a look at some of my longer videos on this topic to understand some of that context. But it seems to me, at any rate, that it's very clear from not only this document, from many others, that there were at least some Jews living in Khazaria. We don't have a great sense of whether they were rabbinic Jews or whether they were Karaite Jews. We don't have a great sense as to how many Khazarians had actually converted to Judaism. It might only be a very thin slice in the aristocracy. We're not even sure if they converted purely out of practical motives, or whether there was actually a deep-seated religious impetus to this. But that's, again, the longer videos. Let us also mention here a very important scholar, Dr. Shaul Stampfer, who is a very respected historian and has had a big influence on my research as well. He actually denies the possibility of there actually being a Khazar conversion. He says the entire story is a Boba Maisa, which is a Khazarian word meaning a fable. It's not actually Khazarian, I'm joking there. But this is a very important thesis, that the entire thing is, a historical fable. I think Dr. Stampfer overemphasizes this, and I think that the preponderance of the evidence suggests that there were at least some Jews living there, but let us pause on that. By the way, if you're ever curious, is Dr. Stampfer an authentic historian? All you have to do is make sure that you're listening to the person who wears a light blue shirt and talks with his hands, because virtually every photograph I have seen of Dr. Stampfer always has him in one of these types of poses. Okay, but let's go on. At any rate, what does the document say? What was the first person account of King Joseph? So we have a text of a letter that purports to be from Chastai ibn Shaprut to King Joseph, which says a lot about, what his motivations were. He says, Chastai ibn Shaprut says, I always asked ambassadors, because he was, by the way, in a very high level position, so he was constantly encountering people traveling from many lands. He says, I asked them, what's the situation of Jews in your territory, and do you know of other Jewish communities and so on? And he's always been curious about this place called Al-Khazar, which he heard about from some emissaries from the region of Khorasan, which is just a little bit east of what would be Iraq today. And he's very curious about these things until finally he gets some documents that suggest that, there are some Jews living there. So he sends some messengers all the way out to Constantinople. And as I mentioned earlier, the messengers get stuck in Constantinople. They can't go all the way. They send a letter, and they bring back this document, which says, from King Joseph, he says, I wish to inform you that your beautifully phrased letter was given to us by Isaac, son of Eliezer, a Jew from Germany. You made us happy, and we are delighted with your understanding and wisdom. You also ask us in the epistle, of what people, of what family, of what tribe are you? So Joseph goes on to say that they're descended from Japhet, which is one of the children of Noah in the Bible, associated especially with the Greeks. And one of Japhet's descendants was a man named Togarma, who is associated with the Turks. And finally, you have the Khazarians, and particularly a king named Bulan. Now, here's the story of the conversion as represented in those documents. Essentially, the King Joseph says in this epistle that the Christians and the Muslims were in the region of Khazaria, and King Bulan was kind of curious, maybe we should abandon our pagan lifestyle and choose one of these monotheistic faiths. There's certainly a pragmatic reason for this, because there's a big geopolitical conflict between the Muslims and the Christians, particularly in the era of the Crusades at the end of the 10th century. And so the King Bulan of the Khazars invites essentially a three-way debate. He wants to hear from the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews. And this debate kind of ends in a standstill until finally King Bulan says to the Muslims, he says, well, listen, which is, of the two, which is worse, Christianity or Judaism? And he says, well, certainly Christianity is worse. Remember, Muslims and Christians are not getting along very well at this point. And then he asks the Christians, who's worse, the Muslims or the Jews? And the Christians say, oh, for sure the Muslims. And so since they both agree that Judaism is slightly better than the other alternative, King Bulan says, fine, that's it. I guess I'm going to become Jewish. And he converts, and some of his society at least converts with him. That is the story of the Khazar conversion.